Today I thought I would talk about my Malibu project, give an update, a little bit of an update, and I made a list of a couple of things to consider before you start a project like this, in particular an LS swap on an older car, and a few things that I would have done differently. Now this project, if you check out my other videos, is my first car. I've owned this car since I was 16 years old and I drove it to high school. It's been restored a couple of times. This time is my favorite version. It's the color that I pictured, and it's the right reliability and power and all those things. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the project, but I learned a lot of things, and a lot of things that I will transfer to other projects, like when I LS swapped my 57 truck. There's a lot of things that I've learned along the way that I thought you guys might like to see. So the first thing to consider with any project on an old car is your use. What are you going to use it for? Are you going to use it for drag racing, performance, burnouts, that sort of thing? Are you just going to go to car shows, go for ice cream? Are you going to do road trips, whatever? In this particular instance, I wanted to be able to I do drive my cars a lot, so I want to be able to do some road trips. My son lives 4 hours away, and we often go see him. We just got back from a road trip in this car. I'm also getting it ready for a bigger road trip next month to go to the East Coast. I'm in Ontario, Canada, and we are going to Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia and driving the whole way there. It's probably going to be about a 15,000 kilometer round trip by the time we're done. So I've had a lot of sorting and a lot of figuring out to do, and a lot of things to try and get ready. So the use of the car will determine which avenue you're going to go for power. It's also going to be determined by a few other things that I'm going to talk about, but if you are going to drag race, or you want performance, or you want to do big smoky burnouts and all those good things, you should probably look at a fresh build on an engine, not using a used engine. And you should check out what's available for aftermarket stuff, what you're going to have to do to tune it, all those things. If you are going for reliability, obviously an LS is very reliable, so you don't really have much worry about that. If you're doing like a road trip kind of thing, or car shows, just cruising around, then you might not want to vary much from stock, and probably a used engine, lightly used engine, will be just fine. The next thing you're going to want to consider is your skill set. Have you done this sort of thing before? Have you played with LS engines or modern engines? Do you know anything about them? Before you get too carried away with buying stuff, you need to really honestly evaluate what you're capable of, what you're willing to accept subbing out to somebody that knows more than you do. For instance, I bought this engine and transmission from a guy that sets them up so they are ready to install. Harness was ready. Everything was more or less plug and play, but still required, general idiosyncrasies of installing an LS engine into your car, and some wiring. And my biggest hurdle itself was the car. The car was very apart, and the LS swap part of it was kind of a smaller portion of it. So my harness is a factory harness that's been reworked and pared down to utilize what I need, and for electric fans and the 4L80 trans, the drive-by-wire pedal, it's all set up. It was all set up for me. Now I did pay a premium for that. There's other ways to do it. The downfall with the way I did it, buying it this way, is I have to get it tuned after. So I had to take it to a tuning shop, have it dyno tuned, have them adjust it, have them set everything up for me. And that's not a cheap endeavor, so you have to budget for that when you're doing it. If you go with like a Holley Terminator kit, from what I understand, they are pretty much plug and play, and you can tune it yourself. You're not going to get as fine of a tune as you would from a dyno tuner, but you can tune it yourself, so it's more than drivable. A pre-made harness like the Holley Terminator, the downfall with that is that it's very expensive up front. It's about the same cost as getting a dyno tune. So if you're going to spend, you know, $1,000, $1,200 on a aftermarket harness that's plug and play, do you just get somebody local or pare down the harness yourself and then spend $1,000 to dyno tune it? That's up to you. It's kind of a preference thing. For this situation, I bought an engine that was running on a stand. I got to see it running. I took it home, I put it in the car, and imagine that, it ran again. It's not as simple as that, but you have to evaluate where you want to go with the project and what your skill set is. Obviously, a big part of it is budget. What do you want to spend? You have to factor in what it's going to cost to get the product that you want and compromises you're willing to make along the way. My budget was not unlimited by any means, but this is not really a project that I was doing to resell or anything, so I was more concerned about the reliability and being the best laid out for my use case. The budget will determine if you're going to go with a new engine or a used engine. Mine is a used engine. It's a Gen 4 5.3 LS out of like a 2011 Chev truck. I had a few things done to it. They removed the variable valve timing and the displacement on demand. It has an upgraded cam, but there are endless possibilities of performance. I could have went to a bigger throttle body, which I understand is probably the best bang for the buck for gains, but really I didn't care. I'm not really that worried about it. Mostly I just idle the car around and just drive it like a normal car with the occasional spirited punch of the throttle. For my case, the power, it dynoed at 315 at the wheels, they figure that's almost 400 at the flywheel. That's more than enough for my use case of being able to road trip and cruise around. So your budget and skill set are going to determine a lot of things. You can buy everything that you could possibly ever imagine for an LS swap. So it's literally, you open the catalog, you order the parts, they show up, and you assemble your car like a Lego set. This project was not really that way for me because I made some choices that worked for me and I am still quite happy with, but could have been simpler for somebody else. For example, I built the transmission crossmember myself. I can fabricate and weld, and in a previous career was a certified welder. I have no problem fabricating and setting things up the way I want them to. So I built a crossmember rather than buying like a G-force or something like that. It cost me $60 in materials and I don't know, a day or two of screwing around, and I didn't spend $400 on a crossmember. Was that time well spent? Probably not. If I added up my labor, it makes no sense whatsoever. I should have just bought it and bolted in. However, I enjoyed the process. I think my end result, the crossmember, turned out really well, and I'm happy with it. In comparison to some of the ones that I've seen, I like mine better, but I think part of that's just because I did it. So you've decided what you want to do with your car. You've decided whether or not you're going to go with a new or used engine. You've decided whether or not you're going to go with a pared down factory harness or a aftermarket Holley or another provider plug and play harness. Now after all this, you've decided all those things, and then you are going to proceed. Where do you get your stuff? Well, the guy that I got my engine from, that's all he does is set up LS engines. I would buy from him again. I may buy from him again, but I may not. Depends on what comes up on Facebook Marketplace, on Kijiji, or in the States, and Craigslist, whatever. The thing that my engine guy told me, that he always searches for wrecked vehicles rather than wrecker vehicles. If a vehicle's made it to the wreckers because it's just worn out or rusted out or whatever, there's a good probability that the engine is tired, because as the vehicle's condition worsens, people look after them less. He liked to get wrecked vehicles that were in an accident or a rollover or whatever, because generally they were working up until the time of the crash, and it gives them a lot more to work with. They were likely better maintained and they weren't just run into the ground. So that's the used engine. But on a new engine, you can go to the dealer and buy a GM crate motor. You can go to any of the performance providers and buy an engine. You can get a stock engine out of a wreck or a worn out old truck or Camaro or something and have it rebuilt. There's any number of options there. There's a lot of different things that you can do. It really depends on your use case, your budget, and your skill set. So 3 things. Now, things that I would have done differently on my project. You never get it right 100%. You don't really know what you want until you've got it. So I did go through and decide my use case and my budget ahead of time, and I am very aware of my skill set because I work on old cars all the time. I'm not a master by any means, but I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. So the things that I would have changed, I probably wouldn't have went with an aftermarket cam. I don't need the power. Most of the time I just idle the car around, and I've got about, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers on it since it's been put together, which is quite a bit. And mostly I just cruise around and drive it like a normal car. So a big giant lumpy cam, even though I have just sort of a middle of the road one, but a big lumpy cam was not needed for my use case. The exhaust, I would have went with a better quality header. Now the headers that I got were supplied by the engine guy, and I believe they're just an Amazon header. The gaskets that come with them, absolutely useless, blew them out in 2 minutes. Lesson learned, go to a GM dealer and buy the GM gaskets for cast iron intake. Those gaskets also work for headers and they don't leak. They're the best ones to go with. Also about the exhaust, I would have went with a quieter exhaust. I since have changed my mufflers since the original configuration, and I've added resonators. I did not think about things like drone, when you hit torque converter lockup and the car just sits at a steady drone. I did a very nice exhaust system from my friend at Classic Auto Repair. He built a X-pipe dual exhaust system. It's quite nice. I'm happy with it, but I originally went with a 2-chamber Flowmaster style muffler that is similar to what I'm running on my 57 truck, and it was too loud. Once I started driving it, there's no way I could deal with that for any amount of time. So we switched to a MagnaFlow style packed muffler. There's a difference between chambered mufflers and packed mufflers. The other thing I did was I added resonators. Now, should I have installed cats? Maybe. But the resonators really took the drone out, and I'm in Canada, so I'm going to talk in kilometers. At 80 kilometers an hour, it's kind of got a drone, but then at like 100 to 120 kilometers an hour, like highway speeds, there's almost no noise. You got to watch the oil pressure gauge to make sure it's still running. It's pretty quiet. So overall, I'm happy with where it is now, but I could have saved myself some pain if I would have just established in the beginning that I really didn't want it to be that loud. So, as I mentioned, this is a truck engine. It's a Gen 4 LS. It's a 5.3 out of like a 2011 Chev truck. Now, on this particular car, I had to go with a smaller alternator. I had to go with a different, smaller pulley on the power steering pump to be able to clear the steering box. Now, I know people have different opinions on this, but I didn't have any luck with the truck manifold, the truck setup, fitting in this car easily. A lot of people, what they do is they will take this hump on their hood and flatten that out or persuade it or whatever. I had trouble because, as you can see, there's a couple of scratches here from making contact with the hood. A friend of mine sent me a Holley spacer, thanks McCurry, that corrected the angle on the throttle body, and that that changed everything for me, because the angle on the truck throttle body automatically points up. So when it points up, that means all your intake and everything else, your air intake and all that stuff has to be pointed up, which I don't have room for. On the car, it's the other way and it points down. So this spacer actually is a wedge shaped, and it can be used on a car one that's pointed down to correct it so it's straight, and the truck one that's pointed up to correct it so it's straight. So if I was to do this again, I probably, in this type of car, I probably would have went with a car engine. That gives you a lower intake, it gives you a different accessory configuration because the throttle body's pointed down, so all these accessories are down. So I would have gone with a car engine. That's always more money because they're more desirable. But it would have been a better suit for this application, and it probably would have worked a little better. Overall, it still is fine. I can't get a cover on the top of this ugly intake manifold. If you notice, I've done some shaving to shave this down. A friend of mine, Brian at Custom Create, is making some, working with me to make a metal cover, but it's really tricky because I have to go like around this stuff, because this stuff here, the clearance between that and the hood is not enough for anything. So it has to sit right on there. So I'm still working on that. We've got a design made. I've just got to bend it up and get them to cut another one and bend it up and carry on. So I would have gone with a car engine. Another thing that I would have done differently is that with a used engine, it comes with all used accessories. So I bought a new alternator, as I mentioned, because I needed the smaller alternator to clear the hood. The idlers, I had all used idlers because that's what came on the engine. Well, it's like $150 to just get new idlers. As soon as I got this thing running, everything was good. Fired it up. Well, the idlers are making noise. They're just, you know, the bearings in the idlers are just a little bit noisy, and the power steering pump was making a noise. The power steering pump actually started leaking after a little while. So really, I ended up having to replace the power steering pump and replace the belt tensioner and the idler anyways. So really, for the price of them, they're stock GM stuff. Get a new power steering pump, get a new belt tensioner, get a new idler. So that way you're starting fresh, you've got a new belt, everything is going to work and not make any noise, and you're just going to hear the engine. So another thing that I would have done differently, and I'm not going to climb under the car right now to show you because I've got some other work to do on the top of this car, is the oil pan. Probably would have went with a different oil pan. Maybe it would have helped me with the placement of the engine. The oil pan that I used is a GM muscle car pan. Now, it will work. This car sits pretty high. It's stock suspension. I'm running 15s instead of the 14s, so it sits. I get a hard time from some friends that it sits a little bit like a monster truck or a 4x4, but I like the kind of 80s tough look, and I also drive this car a lot, so I'm really not worried about bumps or anything like that, potholes. It's just got regular stock suspension. It's not lowered at all, which is quite a contrast from some of my other stuff. So if I would have used like a Cadillac CTS V pan, I could have possibly sat the engine a little lower with different clamshells other than the ones that I made. I could have bought Holly ones or whatever, and that might have sat the engine lower in the car, but it's not what I did. So it also would have gave me more ground clearance, so if the car was lowered, I wouldn't have the oil pan hanging down. Right now the oil pan hangs down about 1.5 inches below the cross member that goes across the front of the car. So it is a point of vulnerability on a bump on a lowered car. This car, I've got so much ground clearance, it's not really an issue at all. So I use the GM Performance muscle car pan. I would recommend on this particular car going with like a Cadillac CTS V pan or something a lower profile. I'm not sure if the Holly ones are lower profile, but something lower profile that would allow you to set the engine down a little lower. The other thing is the front of this pan is almost right on my steering idler shaft that goes across, whatever you want to call it, the thing that tie rods connect to. Clearance there is very minimal, like 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch. So the engine can't really be, it can't be any lower, it can't be any further back. It is right where it needs to be. A different pan, different clamshell mounts, and it might have sat a little bit lower. A ton of people put these truck engines in these cars and have no issues. And really, the issues that I'm talking about, they're kind of minor anyways. It's just preference. If I had my time back, I probably would have spent a little bit more money and got a car engine that was in stock form, and it would have been fine. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's not that exciting video, but there's a lot of lessons I learned from this project. Overall, I'm very happy with the way it turned out. What I have left to do really is I bought a cruise control kit, so I'm going to install cruise control on it for my road trip. And other than that, I have to change the oil again, and that's pretty much it. It's just enjoy, drive, and carry on. I'm overall very happy with the project. Honestly, there was a time where I thought this car would never see the road again. Quite happy it is. I'm enjoying it. We're loving it. LS for the win. My 57 truck is going to get an LS. My 55 Bel Air is going to get an LS. LS the world, everything but air cooled. All right, thanks very much for watching, and please check out my other videos on this project. There's a lot of them. I think I've got like 60 or 70 videos in total, but I have, you know, a good 15 or so on this car. So check them out. If you like it, please share it with your friends, subscribe, all those good things. Thanks.